My parents kicked me out on Easter Sunday with nothing but 2 suitcases and the clothes on my back. You cannot do anything on your own, my father shouted as the door slammed shut. With nowhere else to go, and my checking account practically empty, I walked into a bank the next morning and handed the teller an old, heavy black metal card my grandmother had given me years ago. The branch manager checked. The account went completely pale and whispered, "Madam, please come into my private office and sit down immediately. My name is Natalie. I am 33 years old and I work as a medical data analyst. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a toxic family who completely underestimated your worth." The implosion of my family did not start with a slow build-up. It happened right in the middle of our Easter dinner. We were sitting around the massive mahogany dining table in my parents' $2 million house in an upscale Connecticut suburb. My father, Richard, had always been obsessed with projecting an image of extreme wealth. My mother, Patricia, played the role of the perfect society wife, constantly enabling my younger brother, Brandon. Brandon was 30 years old and the undisputed golden child of the family. Beside him sat his wife, Jada, a sharp and observant corporate auditor who usually kept her thoughts to herself during these tense family gatherings. I had just taken a bite of roasted lamb when a heavy, thick stack of paperwork slammed down onto my china plate. Gravy splattered onto the pristine white tablecloth. I looked up, startled to see my father standing over me. His face was flushed and his eyes held that familiar demanding glare he used whenever he wanted his way. "Sign it," he commanded, tapping a manicured finger against the top page. I carefully moved my fork aside and looked down at the document. The bold letters at the top read Small Business Administration Loan Application. The principal amount listed was $250,000. The primary applicant was Brandon. My eyes darted to the bottom of the page where a sticky note indicated where the CO signer was supposed to sign. That sticky note had my name written on it. "What is this?" I asked, my voice tight. I pushed the greasy stack of papers away from my food. "Your brother is launching a new tech startup," my father explained, returning to his seat at the head of the table. "He has a brilliant business model, but the banks are being unreasonably strict about lending right now. His FICO score took a temporary hit because of some minor issues with his last venture. He needs a co-signer with perfect credit and a steady income. You fit the bill. Sign the papers, Natalie. We need to submit them to the loan officer by tomorrow morning." I stared at him in absolute disbelief. A minor hit to his credit score was the understatement of the century. Brandon was a serial entrepreneur who had never successfully launched a single profitable business. He treated investor money like a personal slush fund, buying expensive sports cars and country club memberships, while his companies quietly went bankrupt. "I am not signing $250,000 loan for Brandon," I said firmly, keeping my voice as level as possible. Brandon scoffed, crossing his arms over his expensive tailored shirt. "Come on, Natalie. Do not be like this. It is just a formality. My startup is going to be evaluated at $5 million by the end of the year. You will not have to pay a single cent. I just need your credit score to get the capital flowing." "Just a formality," I repeated, feeling the familiar heat of anger rising in my chest. "Brandon, 3 years ago you begged me to help you out with a temporary cash flow problem. I drained my savings to pay off $15,000 of your credit card debt because Dad convinced me your business was about to turn a corner. You promised to pay me back within 6 months. I never saw a dime of that money." "That was different." Brandon shot back, his face turning red. "The market conditions changed. I could not control the supply chain issues. As a future CEO, I have to take calculated risks. You would not understand because you just sit at a desk all day crunching numbers." "I am a medical data analyst," I replied coldly. "My job requires precision and hard work. It is why I have a perfect credit score. I am not risking my financial future so you can play pretend CEO." Patricia slammed her wine glass down onto the table. The crystal rang out sharply. How dare you speak to your brother that way, she hissed. Her eyes narrowed as she glared at me across the table. You have always been so selfish, Natalie. Ever since you were a little girl, you have been jealous of Brandon. You sit in your boring little cubicle doing your mundane paper-pushing job, and you resent him because he actually has the ambition to build an empire. I looked at my mother feeling an ache. It did not matter what the reality was. In her eyes, Brandon was a visionary genius, and I was the unsupportive sister. Jada shifted uncomfortably. Because that is the elephant in the room, I continued pressing. You cannot co-sign for him because your own assets are tied up. You are leveraged to the hilt trying to maintain this lifestyle. My father slammed his fist against the table, making silverware rattle. That is not your concern, he bellowed. We are talking about your brother and his future. Actually, Richard, it is my concern. The voice came from across the table. It was Jada. She placed her linen napkin carefully beside her untouched plate. As a corporate auditor, Jada possessed a razor-sharp mind that missed absolutely nothing. She turned her dark, piercing eyes toward her husband. Her voice was terrifyingly calm. Brandon, since when are you applying for a $250,000 small business loan, she asked. We share a bank account. We share a mortgage. A loan of that magnitude requires joint financial disclosure. Why am I hearing about this for the first time at an Easter dinner? Brandon shifted in his seat, suddenly looking like a scolded child rather than the visionary executive he claimed to be. Babe, it is just a temporary bridge loan, he stammered nervously. I was going to tell you tonight after dinner. It is completely routine for a tech startup in the growth phase. Routine, Jada repeated, raising an elegant eyebrow. I audit technology startups for a living, Brandon. I look at their ledgers every single day. There is absolutely nothing routine about needing your sister to co-sign a federal business loan. If the bank is demanding a guarantor with a perfect personal credit score, it means your business entities lack sufficient capital. It means your cash flow is negative. It means your corporate veil is pierced and your personal credit is completely destroyed. I watched my sister-in-law with immense respect. She was dismantling his pathetic lies piece by piece with clinical precision. Jada, please, my mother interrupted, waving her hand dismissively. You do not understand how these high-level venture deals work. Brandon has a very complex financial strategy. You are just an accountant, dear. You look at the past. Brandon is looking at the future. I am a senior auditor at one of the largest firms in the country. Patricia Jada shot back, her tone turning icy. I know exactly how these deals work. What I do not know is where the initial seed money went. Brandon, you told me last month that your new application software was fully funded. If it was fully funded, why do you need $250,000 in emergency capital right now? What exactly did you put up as collateral for the initial lines of credit? The color drained from his face. He looked frantically toward our father for rescue. Richard did not hesitate. He pointed a stern finger at Jada. Listen to me very carefully, young lady, he growled. You are a guest at this table and you married into this family. You do not get to interrogate my son in my dining room. This is blood family business. You stay out of it. Blood family business. Jada echoed, standing up slowly. Her chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. You expect me to stay out of it while my husband attempts to secretly take on a mountain of debt that will inevitably ruin our shared financial future. You want me to sit here and smile while you try to bully Natalie into signing her financial execution warrant. I do not think so, Richard. She turned to Brandon. Her voice shook with a mixture of betrayal and absolute fury. I want to see the ledgers, Brandon. I want to see the profit and loss statements. I want to see every single bank statement from your so-called company by tomorrow morning. If you cannot produce them, or if I find out you forged anything to get those earlier loans, we are done. Do you hear me? We are completely done. Jada grabbed her purse from the back of her chair. She looked at me with an expression of deep sympathy and silent warning. Do not sign that paper, Natalie, she said firmly. Do not let them drag you down with them. Without another word, Jada turned on her heel and walked out of the dining room. The heavy mahogany front door clicked shut a moment later, leaving a suffocating silence in its wake. Well, my mother gasped, clutching her pearl necklace. I never liked her. So aggressive and completely disrespectful to the family hierarchy. Brandon, you need to get your wife under control. Brandon did not look upset about his wife walking out. In fact, he looked relieved that the rigorous interrogation was over. He turned his attention back to me, and a sickeningly arrogant smirk spread across his face. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his legs as if he had already won the argument. Let her throw a tantrum, he scoffed. She will cool off by tomorrow. But we have a more pressing issue right now, Natalie. He tapped his fingers against the loan document. You think you are so smart with your safe little data job? You think you are protecting yourself by refusing to sign this. But let me break it down for you in a way you can understand. Brandon leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. If you do not sign this paper by 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, my company defaults on its server hosting fees. My developers do not get paid. The entire platform crashes and the business goes bankrupt. Every single person who works for me will lose their job, and it will be entirely your fault. I stared at him, feeling a cold chill run down my spine. The sheer audacity of his manipulation was breathtaking. My fault? I asked softly. Absolutely your fault, he sneered. You have the power to save this family legacy, and you are choosing to be petty over a $15,000 credit card bill from 3 years ago. You are willing to destroy my dream because you are bitter. If my company goes under, Mom and Dad lose the angel investment they put in. I lose everything. All because you are too selfish to write your name on a dotted line. He pushed the paperwork across the table until it touched my plate again. You sign this, or you live with the guilt of ruining your own family. The choice is yours, sis. As an auditor, she knew the truth about his reckless spending, but my parents never let her speak. I am not jealous, Mom, I said, maintaining composure. If his business model is so brilliant, why do you not co-sign the loan? Why not put up this house as collateral? My father cleared his throat quickly, looking away from me because he knew that I was absolutely right about his own terrible financial situation right now. I looked down at the heavy loan document sitting near my ruined dinner plate. I looked at Brandon with his incredibly smug and expectant smile. Then I looked at my father, who was watching me closely with his arms crossed. They truly believed that they had completely cornered me. They thought family obligation would force me to cave. I picked up the stack of papers. Brandon smirked, reaching into his jacket to offer me a pen. I ignored it. Instead, I looked my brother in the eye and ripped the loan application in half. The sound of tearing paper echoed loudly. I placed the torn pieces back onto the table. No, I said. My voice was completely steady. The answer is no, Brandon. I am not responsible for your failing company or the developers you cannot afford to pay. I am not responsible for the investment Mom and Dad gave you. You made your financial bed, and now you get to lie in it alone. Brandon dropped his pen. His mouth fell open in shock. You crazy witch? He stammered, his confident facade crumbling. Do you have any idea what you just did to me? I need those forms submitted by tomorrow morning or I lose everything. I just saved myself from your debt, I replied, standing up from the table. Thank you for dinner, but I am leaving right now. Sit back down right this second, my father roared. Richard stood up, his face turning crimson. The veins in his neck were bulging. You do not get to walk away from this family when we need you, Natalie. You owe us. I owe you nothing, I shot back, refusing to back down. I pay my own bills. I live in my own apartment. I built my career entirely on my own while you poured every resource into Brandon. I am done being the safety net for his reckless mistakes. My father let out a harsh laugh. He pulled out his smartphone. You think you are so independent, Natalie. You seem to forget who co-signed the lease for that downtown apartment 2 years ago when your credit history was too thin to secure it alone. You seem to forget who holds the leverage over your living situation. My heart skipped a beat. 2 years ago, I had moved into a highly secure building. The property management required a guarantor because my new job was still within its probationary period. My father had signed the paperwork, holding it over my head ever since. You would not, I challenged him, feeling genuine panic rising in my chest. Watch me, my father sneered. He unlocked his phone and found the emergency number for my property manager. He pressed call right there at the dinner table, putting the phone on speaker so we could all hear. Hello, this is property management, a voice answered through the speaker. Yes, this is Richard, my father said smoothly, transforming his tone into a polite businessman. I am the guarantor on the lease for Unit 402. Natalie is the current tenant. Yes, sir. How can I help you today? The manager asked. I am formally revoking my guarantor status effective immediately, my father stated, looking directly into my eyes. Financial circumstances have changed, and I will no longer accept liability for that unit. I expect you to enforce the security clauses within her lease contract right now. There was a stunned pause on the other end of the line. Sir, revoking the guarantor status on a holiday weekend triggers an immediate breach of contract for the tenant. Building policies require us to issue a notice to vacate. Given the holiday, we would have to restrict access to the unit by tomorrow morning. That is perfectly fine, my father replied, his eyes never leaving mine. Proceed with the breach of contract. I am washing my hands of her completely. He ended the call and tossed the phone onto the table. The loud metallic clatter sounded exactly like a cruel judge dropping a heavy gavel. He crossed his arms and smiled wickedly. There you go, Miss Independent, he mocked. You want to make your own choices. Now you get to deal with real adult consequences. The property manager will lock your key fob access by tomorrow morning. You have exactly 2 hours to pack your bags and leave that apartment. After that, you are officially homeless. I stood frozen, trying to process the sheer speed, betrayal, and absolute cruelty of what had just occurred. My own father had just rendered me homeless on Easter Sunday, all because I refused to take on my brother's massive failing debt. My mother, Patricia, finally spoke up from her end of the long table. She picked up her crystal wine glass and took a slow, deliberate sip before setting it down gently. She looked at me with absolute disdain. You brought this entirely upon yourself, Natalie, she said, her voice dripping with pure ice. We gave you a clear chance to be a supportive member of this family, and you spat in our faces. You think you are so much better than Brandon just because you have a steady paycheck, but look at you now. You have absolutely nothing. Mom, you cannot let him do this, I said, my voice trembling, despite my best efforts to stay strong. I have nowhere to go tonight. My accounts are practically empty because of those high medical bills last month. I cannot put down a new deposit today. Patricia simply adjusted her expensive pearl necklace and offered a chilling, patronizing smile. You cannot survive in the real world without us, Natalie. You never could survive on your own. You will be out on the street tonight, and you will quickly realize how cold and unforgiving life is without our protection. You will be begging to come back by tomorrow, and when you do, you will sign whatever paperwork your brother needs you to sign. Until then, pack your things and get out of our sight. I did not say another word to my parents or my brother. I turned around and walked straight out of their dining room, leaving my Easter dinner on the table. The front door slammed shut behind me, cutting off the sound of my brother laughing. Outside, the weather had turned vicious. A cold, torrential rain was pouring down from the dark sky. I ran to my car. My hands shook as I gripped the steering wheel. I had exactly 2 hours to pack my entire life into whatever would fit in my small sedan. The drive to my downtown apartment was a blur of anxiety and windshield wipers slapping back and forth. When I arrived, the building manager was waiting in the lobby with a stern expression. He informed me that my key fob would be deactivated. I sprinted up the stairs to the 4th floor and threw my 2 largest suitcases onto my bed. I grabbed my work clothes, my laptop, my chargers, and a folder containing my documents. I left behind my furniture and my books. By the time I dragged my 2 heavy suitcases back down to the lobby, the electronic lock on my apartment door clicked shut, echoing with a terrible finality. I was officially locked out. I loaded my bags into the trunk of my car and sat in the driver's seat listening to the rain pound against the roof. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. The screen displayed a balance of $42.15. Just 3 weeks prior, I had suffered a health scare that required a medical deductible. That emergency had drained my savings account. I never anticipated that my own father would intentionally render me homeless before my next payday. I could not afford a hotel room. I could not afford a new security deposit. Patricia was right about one thing. I was completely out on the street. I started the engine and drove aimlessly through the streets until I saw the neon sign of a 24-hour diner on the edge of town. I parked under a street lamp and ran inside, clutching my document folder against my chest. The diner smelled of stale coffee and fried food. I slid into a cracked vinyl booth in the corner. A tired waitress approached, and I ordered the cheapest item on the menu, just a cup of black coffee so they would not kick me out. I sat there shivering in my damp clothes, wrapping my hands around the warm mug. Desperation gnawed at the edges of my mind. I opened the folder, hoping to find a forgotten cash reserve or some legal clause in my lease agreement that could buy me a few more days. I flipped through my birth certificate, my passport, and my car registration. As I pulled out a stack of old tax returns, something heavy slipped out from between the pages and clattered onto the table. It was a card, but not a normal debit or credit card. It was made of solid black metal. It felt heavy and cold against my fingers. There were no bank logos on it. There was no expiration date. The only things printed on the dark surface were an embossed account number and a small routing code for a private wealth division. I stared at the metal object as a memory rushed to my mind, bringing tears to my eyes. 5 years ago, my grandmother Beatrice lay in a hospital bed. Beatrice was a formidable woman who built her own fortune and saw right through my father and his obsession with appearances. She knew exactly how toxic Richard and Patricia were. On the night before she passed away, she asked the nurses to leave the room. She grabbed my hand with surprising strength and pressed this black metal card into my palm. "I want you to hide this, Natalie," she had whispered, her voice raspy but full of clarity. "Do not tell your father. Do not tell your mother. Do not tell that brother of yours. You are the only one in this family with a spine. They will try to break you down. They will try to use you. You put this card away and you forget about it. You only use this when they push you to the absolute edge. You will know when the time is right." At the time, I was just a young, struggling student. I thought the card might contain a few $1,000s for a rainy day. I hid it in my emergency folder, just as she asked, and over the years I forgot about its existence. I never wanted to touch her final gift to me. But sitting in this diner homeless, broke and betrayed by the people, I realized the absolute edge was right now. They had pushed me off the cliff. I looked down at the heavy black metal card resting next to my cold cup of coffee. A profound sense of calm washed over me. I traced the embossed numbers with my thumb. My grandmother had anticipated this betrayal perfectly. She knew that my father would use his financial leverage to try and completely destroy my independence. She had left me a powerful lifeline. I turned my gaze toward the diner window, watching the cold rain wash the empty streets. The neon clock on the diner wall glowed, displaying 2:00 in the morning. I had 6 long hours to wait. I pulled my wet coat tighter around my shoulders and sat back against the booth. I did not cry anymore. I did not feel sorry for myself. I simply drank my coffee and watched the numbers slowly tick forward. I was going to wait right here until the bright sun came up. And at exactly 8:00 in the morning, I was going to walk into the bank and find out what my Grandma Beatrice had left behind for me. I paid for my coffee with 2 crumpled dollar bills, leaving a small tip before I walked out of the quiet diner. The cold morning air hit my face, but I felt completely wide awake. I drove my packed sedan toward the towering skyscrapers of the downtown financial district. My destination was the primary branch of the National Bank, where my grandmother always conducted her business. The building was an imposing structure of white marble and thick glass reflecting the early morning light. I parked in the adjacent garage and took a deep breath. I had already planned out a strict budget. If Grandma Beatrice had left me $5,000, I could secure a decent studio apartment and pay for a moving truck to retrieve my furniture. If she had left me $10,000, I could afford to take a few days off work to reset my life and consult a lawyer about my lease. That was the absolute maximum I expected. A modest safety net from a woman who loved me. I stood on the sidewalk watching the security guard unlock the glass doors right at 8 o'clock. I was the first customer to step inside the expansive lobby. The interior was pristine and quiet with polished floors that echoed under my damp shoes. Several tellers were standing behind their stations organizing their cash drawers. I approached a young teller at the far end of the counter. She wore a crisp bank uniform and offered a standard customer service smile. "Good morning," she greeted me cheerfully. "How can I help you today?" I did not say anything at first. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the heavy black metal card and slid it across the smooth marble counter. "I would like to check the balance on this account," I said, keeping my voice calm. "And I need to make a withdrawal." The teller picked up the card. I saw her brow furrow as her fingers registered the unusual weight and cold metallic texture. She turned the card over looking for a magnetic strip or a bank logo, but found nothing besides the embossed routing code and the account number. "I have never seen a card quite like this before," she murmured more to herself than to me. "Let me run the account number through our primary database." She typed the digits into her keyboard with rapid precision. I stood patiently waiting for her to tell me I had a few $1,000s to my name. Instead, the atmosphere in the bank shifted instantly. The moment she pressed the enter key, her computer monitor flashed a bright, solid red. A sharp alert chime sounded from her terminal. The teller jumped back in her chair, clearly startled by the sudden warning. Her eyes widened as she stared at the screen. A severe warning message appeared in bold black letters demanding the highest executive security clearance immediately. The system locked her out of all other functions. The keyboard became unresponsive. "What is wrong?" I asked, feeling a spike of anxiety. Did the account expire? The teller did not answer me. Her hands were shaking as she picked up her desk phone and pressed an emergency button. She whispered frantically into the receiver, shielding her mouth. "I need a regional director at Station 4 right now," she stammered. "The system triggered a Tier 1 asset lockdown. I do not know what to do." Less than 30 seconds later, a set of frosted glass doors behind the teller counter swung open violently. A tall, distinguished man in his 50s practically sprinted out of the executive suite. He wore a custom-tailored gray suit and a gold tie clip indicating his rank within the institution. His name tag identified him as Mr. Harrison, the Regional Director of Private Wealth Management. He rushed frantically to the front teller station and leaned over the young woman's shoulder to look directly at her locked monitor. I watched as the color drained from his face. His skin turned an ashen white. He looked down at the black metal card resting on the marble counter, and then he slowly looked up at me. His eyes were wide with a mixture of absolute shock and profound respect. He swallowed hard, adjusting his silk tie with a trembling hand. "You are Natalie?" he asked, his voice tight with suppressed emotion. "Yes, I am," I replied, taking a step back. "Is there a problem with my grandmother's account?" Mr. Harrison grabbed the metal card with extreme care, as if he were handling a priceless artifact. "There is no problem at all," he assured me, stepping out from behind the teller counter to stand directly in front of me. He bypassed standard customer service protocols entirely. His demeanor shifted into an extreme level of deference that I had never experienced from a bank executive before. "Please forgive the commotion. This specific security protocol is only triggered for our most highly protected clients. We need to move this conversation to a completely secure location immediately." Before I could ask any more questions, Mr. Harrison extended his arm and guided me away from the public lobby. We walked past standard offices and approached a heavy wooden door tucked away in a restricted access corridor. He swiped an encrypted keycard and placed his thumb on a biometric scanner. The door clicked open, revealing a luxurious, soundproof private viewing room. The walls were paneled in rich mahogany, and thick velvet curtains covered the windows. It felt more like a secure bunker than a financial office. He respectfully ushered me inside, stepped in behind me, and pushed the heavy door shut. The steel security locks engaged automatically with a loud final click, instantly cutting off all ambient noise from the outside world. Mr. Harrison turned to face me, clutching the black metal card tightly in his hand. He took a deep, shaky breath, looked me directly in the eyes, and said, "Madam, please sit down." I slowly lowered myself into a plush leather chair on the opposite side of a massive glass desk. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I watched as Mr. Harrison walked over to a secure terminal embedded in the wall. He inserted the black metal card into a specialized reader and placed his palm on a glowing biometric scanner. The wall screen hummed to life, casting a cool blue glow across the dim room. He took a seat across from me, folding his hands on the desk. He looked at me with an expression of profound reverence and relief. "Your grandmother Beatrice was one of the most brilliant and formidable women I have ever had the privilege of knowing." He began, his voice smooth and measured. "She built a massive financial portfolio with absolute precision and unmatched foresight. She also possessed a flawless understanding of human nature, especially when it came to her own family. She knew exactly what your parents were capable of doing to you." I swallowed hard, gripping the armrests of my chair. "How much did she leave me?" I asked, bracing myself for a number like 50,000 or maybe even $100,000. I figured that would be enough to trigger this kind of high-level security. Mr. Harrison pressed a button on his desk console and turned the monitor so I could see the screen. "The black metal card you handed me is not a standard bank card," he explained. "It is an encrypted physical access key to a highly classified financial entity. It unlocks a generation-skipping trust. And as of this morning, that trust contains liquid assets and holdings valued at exactly $14,500,000. I stopped breathing. The room seemed to spin. I stared at the crisp white numbers glowing on the screen. $14.5 million. It was an incomprehensible sum. It was not a safety net. It was an absolute empire. I opened my mouth to speak, but no sound came out. My mind raced back to the cold rain, the empty checking account, and the stale coffee at the diner just a few hours ago. "This cannot be right," I finally managed to whisper. "If she had this much money, why did she hide it? Why did she let me struggle? I had to take out loans for my education. I lived paycheck to paycheck. Why keep this a secret from everyone? Because if she had given you access to this wealth while you were still entangled with your parents, they would have drained every single cent," Mr. Harrison stated firmly. "Your grandmother recognized that your father, Richard, is a financial parasite. She saw his obsession with projecting wealth and his willingness to exploit anyone to maintain his fragile status. She also knew your mother, Patricia, would blindly enable him while pouring resources into your brother, Brandon. Beatrice knew that if they ever discovered this money existed, they would have manipulated you, guilt-tripped you, and bled you completely dry." He leaned forward, looking intently into my eyes. "So she set up a generation-skipping trust. This specific legal structure completely bypassed your father, preventing him from ever staking a claim to her fortune as her direct heir. She named you as the sole and exclusive beneficiary, but she implemented a highly unusual and ironclad contingency clause to protect you. She called it the severance protocol." I leaned in closer, entirely captivated by the sheer genius of my grandmother. "What is the severance protocol?" I asked. "Beatrice legally mandated that this trust remain entirely dormant and completely invisible to you until a very specific condition was met," Mr. Harrison explained. "You could only gain access to these millions when your parents formally and completely severed all financial ties with you. She specifically stipulated that the trust would unlock only if they abandoned you or attempted to use financial leverage to render you destitute. She knew your father used his money to control you. She told me before she died that one day, Richard would push you too far and try to cut you off to force your compliance. My mind flashed back to the Easter dinner, the brutal ultimatum, the torn loan application, the arrogant smirk on my father's face as he called my landlord. Mr. Harrison tapped the screen, bringing up a digital log of incoming alerts. At 2:15 this morning, our automated legal monitoring system received a notification from a property management firm, he said. Your father formally revoked his status as the financial guarantor on your residential lease. By doing so, he initiated a breach of contract resulting in your immediate eviction. He legally severed his financial obligation to you and abandoned you. A cold shiver ran down my spine, followed by a wave of absolute triumph. My father thought he was destroying my life. He thought he was asserting his ultimate dominance by throwing me out into the rain. He told me I would be begging to come back by morning. By attempting to ruin you, your father unknowingly handed you the keys to the kingdom, Mr. Harrison said, a faint smile touching his lips. His malicious action legally triggered the severance protocol. As of this moment, the $14.5 million is entirely yours. There are no restrictions. There is no oversight from your parents. You have absolute financial autonomy. I sat back in the leather chair, letting the magnitude of the situation wash over me. The anxiety suffocating me evaporated completely. I was not homeless. I was not broke. I was a multi-millionaire. I thought about Brandon and his failing startup. I thought about my parents leveraged to the hilt trying to maintain their fake society image. They had thrown me away just to save him. My clever grandmother had prepared a brilliant trap for them. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat, preparing to reveal the greatest secret hidden within the trust. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat, preparing to reveal the greatest secret hidden within the trust. He reached down into the lower drawer of his massive desk and pulled out a thick leather-bound folder. He placed it squarely in the center of the glass surface between us. While the $14.5 million in liquid cash and diversified stock portfolios is certainly a life-changing sum of money, he said, keeping his tone completely serious, your grandmother was not simply interested in making you wealthy. She wanted to give you absolute power over your own destiny and a shield against the exact people who tried to destroy you. He tapped the leather cover with his index finger. Cash can be spent, Natalie. Cash can be manipulated or drained if you are not careful, but leverage is forever. Go ahead and open it. My hands trembled slightly as I reached across the desk and flipped open the heavy leather cover. Inside sat a stack of pristine legal documents, all bearing the official red seals of the state corporate registry. The top document was a certificate of incorporation for a private limited liability company. The name printed across the top read, Ironclad Holdings, LLC. I looked up at Mr. Harrison, feeling a wave of confusion. Ironclad Holdings, I read aloud. What is this? Is this a real estate company my grandmother owned? It is a highly specialized private asset acquisition firm, Mr. Harrison explained, leaning back in his chair. Beatrice established Ironclad Holdings entirely within the impenetrable shell of your generation skipping trust. The company has a completely anonymous corporate structure. To the outside world and to public record searches, it is just a faceless financial entity operated by a board of shadow directors. But in reality, you are the sole managing member. You own 100% of Ironclad Holdings. Every decision it makes, and every asset it controls, now belongs exclusively to you. I flipped to the second page. A massive ledger listed various corporate assets, but one specific file caught my eye. It was a deed of trust and a promissory note. The address printed on the legal property description made my blood run completely cold. It was the exact address of my parents' sprawling $2 million Connecticut mansion. I stared at the address, my mind struggling to process what I was looking at. Why is my parents' home address in this corporate portfolio? I asked. Mr. Harrison offered a sharp, knowing smile. 3 years ago, your father Richard found himself in a significant financial bind, he explained. He needed an immediate injection of capital to cover a series of terrible business investments your brother Brandon had made. Because Richard was already over-leveraged, he could not secure a traditional bank loan. He was forced to quietly refinance the primary mortgage on his mansion through a secondary subprime lending market. What Richard did not know was that your grandmother Beatrice was watching his every single move. The moment that high-risk mortgage hit the secondary market, Beatrice directed Ironclad Holdings to purchase the debt entirely in cash. She bought the paper on your parents' house for $1.8 million. The air in the room suddenly felt incredibly thin. I took a deep breath to steady my racing heart. I looked back down at the promissory note bearing my father and my mother's signature at the bottom. The realization hit me with the force of a freight train. Are you telling me, I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, that Ironclad Holdings owns their mortgage? Mr. Harrison nodded slowly, his eyes gleaming with professional satisfaction. I am telling you exactly that, Natalie. Your parents do not own that beautiful $2 million estate. The bank does not own that estate. Ironclad Holdings owns the debt on that estate. And as of 2:15 this morning, when your father foolishly triggered the severance protocol by evicting you, Ironclad Holdings was transferred entirely into your name. I sat perfectly still. The sheer magnitude of the situation washed over me in waves of absolute shock. My father had sat at his dining table and laughed while making me homeless. My mother had told me I would not survive a day without them. They threw me out into the freezing rain, believing they held all the power. But they were paying their monthly mortgage to a faceless corporation. They were writing massive checks every single month to keep a roof over their heads. And they had absolutely no idea that the faceless corporation was actually me. I was their bank. I was their landlord. I held the deed of trust to their entire fake empire. You hold the leash now, Natalie, Mr. Harrison said softly, breaking the silence. Every time they make a payment, it goes directly into your trust account. If they ever miss a payment or default on the terms of that loan, Ironclad Holdings has the absolute legal right to initiate foreclosure proceedings and seize the property. They have been living inside a trap your grandmother built for them 3 years ago. And they just handed you the remote control to detonate it. I looked down at the documents, feeling a cold, hard smile spread across my face. My father wanted to play a ruthless game of financial leverage. He wanted to use housing and credit scores to break me down and force me to submit to his golden child son. But Grandma Beatrice had seen the true nature of his arrogant game. She had armed me with a weapon so devastating he would never see it coming. He thought he was the master of the board, but he did not even know what game we were playing. I closed the heavy leather folder and looked back at the wealth manager. The helpless, panicked girl who had cried in her car last night was completely gone. I knew exactly what I needed to do right now. I need to execute this perfectly, I told Mr. Harrison, my voice echoing with a newfound authority in the secure room. I want to tighten the net around them before they even realize they are caught. Mr. Harrison nodded his approval, closing the heavy leather folder and locking it back inside his desk. The most crucial element of this strategy is absolute silence, he advised, leaning forward. Your father operates on ego and intimidation. He expects you to come crawling back today, begging for your old apartment and agreeing to sign that catastrophic loan for your brother. If you react, if you gloat, or show your hand prematurely, you give him a chance to maneuver. Let him believe he has won. Let him sleep soundly in the house you now own. Silence is the ultimate weapon in financial warfare. I agreed completely. I spent the next 4 hours inside that bank fortress, executing the first phase of my new life. With Mr. Harrison guiding the process, we established a series of shell corporations to mask my identity. I was no longer just Natalie, the medical data analyst. I was the silent managing director of several highly capitalized entities. My first act of business was securing a safe and permanent place to live. I did not go back to my old landlord or search for a cheap studio apartment on the edge of town. Instead, I instructed my newly formed real estate trust to lease a stunning luxury penthouse in the heart of the downtown financial district. By mid-afternoon, I was standing on the wraparound balcony of my new home, looking out over the sprawling city skyline. The penthouse featured floor-to-ceiling windows, a massive chef-level kitchen, and a private elevator that opened directly into the foyer. It was paid for a year in advance using a corporate account completely untraceable to my name. I took a long hot shower in a pristine marble bathroom, letting the immense stress of the previous 24 hours wash down the drain. I had abandoned my cheap furniture and my old life without a single regret. The only things I brought with me were my 2 suitcases and the absolute certainty that my family was going to pay heavily for their cruelty. But I knew I could not dismantle their fake empire on my own. I needed sharks. The next morning, I hired a top-tier legal firm that specialized in aggressive corporate litigation and complex forensic accounting. I sat in a sleek glass boardroom with 3 senior partners and handed them the details of Ironclad Holdings, along with everything I knew about my father's business dealings and my brother's endless string of failed startups. "I want a complete financial autopsy," I instructed the lead attorney. "I want to know every hidden debt, every leveraged asset, and every missed payment. Leave no stone unturned. Find every dirty secret they are hiding behind their country club smiles." While my legal team went to work tearing into my family's financial footprint, my personal phone began to explode with incoming notifications. The harsh reality of my absence was finally setting in for my parents. But instead of genuine concern or remorse, their messages were laced with their typical toxic gaslighting and manipulation. My phone screen lit up with a lengthy text from my father. "I hope you enjoyed your night out on the wet street, Natalie. This is what the real world looks like without my protection. Come back to the house, apologize to your brother right now, and sign the paperwork. I might consider calling your landlord to fix your mess if you show some actual respect." A few hours later, my mother chimed in to support him. "Natalie, stop throwing this childish tantrum immediately. Brandon is under a lot of stress because of your incredibly selfish behavior. We are having a nice family dinner tonight. Come home and act like a mature adult before your father cuts you off for good." I sat on my plush velvet sofa, sipping an expensive glass of red wine, and read their messages with a cold, detached amusement. They truly believed I was shivering in a cheap motel or sleeping in the back of my car. They thought they held all the power in the world. They thought they were the untouchable masters of the universe while sitting comfortably in a heavily mortgaged mansion they were actively losing. I did not block their numbers. I wanted to see every desperate attempt at manipulation. But I did not reply. I let the silence stretch out, letting them twist in the wind of their own arrogance. Over the next few days, my forensic accountants began feeding me detailed preliminary reports. The financial picture they painted was far worse than I had ever imagined. My father had taken out multiple high-interest bridge loans just to cover the exorbitant property taxes on the estate. He was constantly shifting money between personal accounts and business ledgers in a desperate shell game to maintain the illusion of liquid wealth. My brother was drowning in undisclosed liabilities. He had burned through 3 separate angel investments with absolutely nothing to show for it, but a leased sports car and expensive dinners. The entire family was a fragile house of cards waiting for a single gust of wind to knock it all down. I was reviewing a particularly damning spreadsheet regarding my brother's mysterious cash flow when my phone buzzed with a new email notification. It was not sent to my standard personal address. It arrived directly in the newly encrypted secure inbox I had set up for my corporate dealings. I frowned, setting my wine glass down on the marble coffee table. Only my legal team and Mr. Harrison had this private address. I opened the secure message. The sender address was a scrambled proxy meant to hide the user's true identity, but the bold subject line made my heart pound fiercely against my ribs. It read, "Ironclad Holdings and the Easter Dinner." I clicked on the body of the email. There was no greeting and no signature. It contained only 2 short, terrifying sentences that hit me like a bolt of lightning. "I know you are looking into his accounts. We need to talk immediately because Brandon is committing federal fraud." I stared at the glowing screen. There was only one person who was at that Easter dinner who possessed the high-level financial expertise to uncover federal fraud and the motivation to use an encrypted server to reach out to me safely. It was Jada. My brother's wife had finally found the deep rot hiding inside his fake startup, and she was absolutely ready to burn it all down. I replied to the encrypted email within seconds, suggesting a highly discreet location. We agreed to meet at an exclusive artisan coffee shop located in the basement level of a luxury high-rise across town. It was the kind of place where corporate executives held quiet off-the-record meetings, hidden away from the prying eyes of the street-level public. I arrived early, securing a private booth in the back corner facing the entrance. I ordered a black coffee and waited, my mind racing with a million different possibilities. Exactly at 10 o'clock, Jada walked through the heavy glass doors. She wore a sharp charcoal blazer and dark slacks, looking every bit the ruthless corporate auditor she was. But as she slid into the booth across from me, I noticed the dark circles under her eyes. The polished facade was cracking, revealing a woman pushed to her absolute limit. I pushed a menu toward her, but she shook her head. "No coffee," she said, her voice clipped and professional. "I need to keep my hands steady, and caffeine will not help with that right now." I leaned forward, keeping my voice low over the ambient jazz playing in the cafe. "How did you know about Ironclad Holdings?" I asked. Jada let out a dry, humorless laugh. "I am a senior auditor, Natalie. Tracing shell companies is what they pay me to do. When your father threw his little temper tantrum on Easter and kicked you out, I knew you would not just roll over. I started looking into the family assets to see what leverage they actually held. That is when I noticed a strange discrepancy in Richard and Patricia mortgage payments. They were not paying a traditional bank. They were paying a private entity called Ironclad Holdings. It did not take me long to follow the breadcrumbs from the deed of trust back to a closed corporate registry. The timeline of the purchase matched perfectly with the year your grandmother passed away. You are the only person smart enough to wield a weapon like that in complete silence." I nodded slowly, acknowledging her brilliant investigative work. "So why reach out to me?" I asked. "Why use a proxy email?" "Because my husband is a criminal," Jada stated bluntly. Her dark eyes flashed with an intense, burning rage. "And your parents are actively helping him bury the evidence." When I walked out of that dining room on Easter, I went straight to Brandon's home office and pulled his physical ledgers. I spent the last 3 days conducting a hostile audit of his entire startup operation. What I found was not just financial mismanagement. It was textbook federal wire fraud. I felt a surge of adrenaline. "Tell me everything," I said. "Brandon does not have a real software product," Jada explained, leaning closer. "He has a wireframe shell that does absolutely nothing. To secure his initial rounds of angel investment, he needed to show consistent revenue growth. So he fabricated an entire network of fake clients. He created dummy corporations and generated hundreds of fake invoices showing massive accounts receivable. He then took those fraudulent invoices to aggressive subprime corporate lenders and used them as collateral to secure high-interest mezzanine loans. He is using the new loan money to pay off the old investors, creating the illusion of a highly profitable enterprise." "It is a classic Ponzi scheme," I whispered, feeling a mixture of horror and vindication. "My golden child brother was a federal criminal." "Exactly?" Jada nodded. "But it gets so much worse. The subprime lenders started demanding secondary collateral because the loan amounts were getting too high. Brandon had already burned through the initial cash your parents gave him. So he did the unthinkable." Jada paused, her jaw clenching so tightly I could see the muscles working in her cheek. She reached into her leather tote bag and pulled out a thick manila envelope. She placed it on the table between us. "He forged my signature, Natalie," she said, her voice dropping to a furious whisper. "My husband took a commercial credit application for $250,000, and he forged my name on the guarantor line. He tried to attach my pristine financial record and my auditing license to his sinking ship without my knowledge. If I had not caught him this weekend, that debt would have ruined my entire life. I could lose my CPA license. I could face federal conspiracy charges just for being married to him. I stared at her, completely appalled. Brandon was always arrogant and financially reckless, but I never imagined he would sink to the level of forging his own wife's signature on federal lending documents. He crossed a massive line. "I am so incredibly sorry, Jada," I said. "What are you going to do?" "I am going to destroy him," Jada said coldly. "I have already contacted the best divorce attorney in the state. I filed the initial separation paperwork yesterday morning under seal. Brandon does not know yet. He thinks I am staying at a hotel to cool off after our Easter argument. He thinks I will eventually come back and play the supportive corporate wife. He has no idea that I am actively building a criminal case against him." Jada reached into her pocket and pulled out a small silver flash drive. She slid it across the wooden table until it touched my hand. "This drive contains everything," she said. "It has the fake invoices, the fraudulent loan applications, the IP addresses for his dummy corporations, and the digital trail proving he forged my signature. It also contains emails between Brandon and your father. Richard knows about the fake invoices, Natalie. Your father actually advised Brandon on how to hide the money transfers from the IRS. They are both complicit in federal tax evasion." I slipped the drive into my purse, feeling a profound sense of alliance with the woman sitting across from me. I left the coffee shop with the silver flash drive safely secured inside my purse, feeling a profound sense of alliance with the woman sitting across from me. Jada had handed me the exact ammunition I needed to completely dismantle the fake empire my family had built. I drove straight to the towering glass building where my new legal team operated. I took the private elevator up to the top floor and walked directly into the primary conference room. My lead attorney, a sharp and relentless man named Harrison, was already waiting at the massive oak table with two forensic accountants. I placed the silver flash drive in the center of the table. "Jada just gave us the keys to the castle," I announced. "Let us see exactly what my brother has been hiding behind his flashy suits and arrogant smile." One of the accountants inserted the drive into a secure terminal and projected the contents onto the large screen at the front of the room. For the next 3 hours, we sat in that conference room and methodically dissected the deep financial rot of Brandon and his so-called technology startup. The deeper we dug into the ledgers, the more nauseating the reality became. Brandon did not just run a failing business. He ran a completely fraudulent shell company designed exclusively to fund his lavish lifestyle. The accountants pulled up the expense reports and cross-referenced them with the initial investor capital. The seed money that was supposed to go towards software development and server hosting had been systematically siphoned off into personal accounts. "Look at these outgoing wire transfers," the accountant said, pointing a laser pointer at a series of massive expenditures. "Your brother used investor capital to secure a lease on a $200,000 sports car. He paid $60,000 for an exclusive country club membership and custom-tailored suits. He was bleeding the company dry to portray the image of a wildly successful young visionary, while his actual product did not even exist. He treated his investors like a personal piggy bank, showing absolutely no regard for the legal consequences of his actions." But the absolute worst part was discovering how deeply my parents were entangled in his mess. After I had firmly refused to co-sign that $250,000 federal loan on Easter Sunday, Brandon panicked. The subprime lenders were threatening to call in his fraudulent debts. He desperately needed a massive infusion of cash to keep the Ponzi scheme from collapsing entirely. Harrison pulled up a separate set of banking records that Jada had managed to intercept. These documents showed the personal financial trajectory of my father Richard and my mother Patricia over the last several weeks. "When you walked out on them," Natalie Harrison explained, "your father realized he had lost his primary financial scapegoat, but his golden child was still crying for a bailout. So Richard and Patricia did the unthinkable." The screen flashed to display a series of catastrophic withdrawal statements. To keep Brandon afloat, my parents had completely drained their own retirement accounts. They liquidated their mutual funds and long-term investment portfolios, paying massive early withdrawal penalties. They threw every single dollar of their life savings into the black hole of Brandon and his fake startup. They literally burned their own future just to protect his fragile ego and maintain the illusion of his success. I sat back in my chair shaking my head in sheer disbelief. They were completely broke. My father had liquidated his entire net worth for a son actively committing federal wire fraud. But the final revelation, the one that truly sealed their fate, was hidden in a secondary folder labeled Primary Residence Liabilities. The forensic accountant opened the file, and a complex spreadsheet populated the screen, showing the payment history for the sprawling $2 million Connecticut mansion. "Remember how your parents have been funding this desperate rescue mission?" Harrison asked, leaning forward, resting his hands on the table. Liquidating retirement accounts takes time, and they needed immediate cash flow to keep Brandon out of prison. They had to cut expenses somewhere drastic. I looked at the spreadsheet and my eyes widened as I processed the numbers highlighted in bold red ink. "They stopped paying their mortgage," I whispered, realizing the sheer magnitude of their stupidity. "Exactly." Harrison smiled a sharp, predatory smile. "According to these internal ledgers, your father Richard intentionally halted all payments on his primary mortgage exactly 90 days ago. He diverted those monthly housing payments directly into Brandon and his fraudulent business accounts." "Why would he do something so incredibly reckless?" I asked. "He knows the bank will eventually come for the house." "Because he is arrogant," Harrison replied easily. "Your father assumes that his lender is just a massive, faceless corporate entity. He figured he could ignore the billing statements for a few months, use the cash to save his son, and then negotiate a generous grace period or a loan modification once Brandon secured his next round of fake funding. Richard thinks the rules do not apply to him. He genuinely believes he can outsmart a corporate financial institution by simply dodging their calls and hiding behind his rich society persona." I stared at the red numbers on the screen, feeling a cold surge of absolute power coursing through my veins. My father had stopped paying his mortgage for 3 straight months. He thought he was playing a clever game of financial hide and seek. He had absolutely no idea that the corporate lender he was currently defrauding was actually Ironclad Holdings. He had no idea that the bank he was ignoring was actually me. By desperately trying to save his golden child, my father had handed me the exact legal ammunition I needed to destroy his entire world. He was 90 days late. He was officially in default, and I was not going to grant him a single day of grace. I looked at Harrison and the forensic accountants sitting around the conference table. The time for gathering information was officially over. It was time to start dropping the hammer. "Proceed with the notice of default." I instructed, my voice echoing with absolute authority in the quiet room. "Draft the paperwork today. Furthermore, I want a strict directive placed on my parents' account within Ironclad Holdings. When my father inevitably calls begging for a loan modification or a 90-day grace period, the answer is a non-negotiable no. He receives no leniency. He receives no extensions. He is to be treated exactly like the high-risk delinquent borrower that he is." Harrison nodded, his pen flying across his legal pad. "Consider it done, Natalie," he said. "We will erect a complete administrative wall. Richard will not be able to bypass the legal department. He will find no sympathetic ear." The trap was set. Over the next 48 hours, the reality of their financial negligence finally caught up with my parents. The heavy certified envelope containing the formal notice of default arrived at their sprawling Connecticut mansion. I could only imagine the sheer panic that must have gripped my father when he signed for that certified letter. For 3 months, he had lived in a state of supreme arrogance, believing he could simply ignore his mortgage obligations without consequence. Now, a faceless corporate entity was formally threatening to rip his beloved estate right out from under him. According to the updates Harrison provided me, my father immediately attempted to handle the situation, using his typical aggressive tactics. Richard called the customer service number listed on the default notice, expecting to reach a low-level representative he could easily intimidate. He intended to shout demand to speak with a manager and throw his supposed wealth around until they granted him a retroactive forbearance. Instead, his call was routed directly to one of the most ruthless corporate litigators on my payroll. My lawyer did not flinch when my father yelled. He simply read the terms of the promissory note back to him in a cold, clinical tone. He informed my father that Ironclad Holdings does not grant grace periods to borrowers who willfully divert their assets to unverified business ventures. The lawyer stated clearly that the full past due balance, plus all accumulated late fees and legal penalties, must be paid immediately, or the foreclosure process would advance to the next stage. My father was abruptly disconnected, leaving him staring at a dial tone and a massive impending legal disaster. He had hit a solid brick wall. He could not bully Ironclad Holdings, and he certainly did not have the cash to cure the default. With their backs pushed firmly against the wall, my parents did exactly what toxic people always do when their own reckless choices catch up with them. They looked for someone else to blame. Since my father could not scream at the bank, he turned his fury toward his favorite designated scapegoat. My personal cell phone began to vibrate relentlessly on the marble kitchen island of my luxury penthouse. It started early on a Thursday morning. First came a barrage of frantic text messages from my mother. Then came the missed calls from my father. I did not answer a single one of them. I simply let every incoming call roll directly to my voicemail inbox. I wanted them to leave a permanent audio record of their desperation and their completely unhinged entitlement. I walked over to my state-of-the-art espresso machine and began preparing my morning coffee. The rich aroma of freshly ground espresso beans filled the bright open-air kitchen. Sunlight poured through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a breathtaking view of the bustling city below. I poured the dark espresso into a ceramic cup, added a splash of steamed milk, and walked over to my plush velvet sofa. I sat down, crossed my legs, and finally tapped the voicemail icon on my phone. I pressed play and let the audio fill the quiet penthouse. The first message was from my father. His voice was shaking with a mixture of raw panic and venomous anger. "Natalie, pick up the phone, right now," he shouted into the receiver. "You need to come home and fix this mess immediately. We are facing a severe cash flow emergency because you were too stubborn to sign that loan for your brother. If you had just done what you were told and co-signed that paperwork, Brandon would have his funding, and we would not be dealing with these ruthless corporate loan sharks. You are destroying this family with your selfishness. Call me back and bring your checkbook." The message ended with a loud, aggressive click. I took a slow, calm sip of my warm espresso. The flavor was rich and perfectly balanced. I felt absolutely nothing for the man screaming through the speaker. There was no guilt. There was no residual fear from my childhood. There was only a profound sense of analytical detachment. The next voicemail queued up automatically. This one was from my mother, Patricia. Her tone was completely different from my father, but equally manipulative. She was employing her classic victim routine, crying dramatically into the microphone. "Natalie, how could you abandon us like this?" she wailed, her voice cracking with fake sorrow. "Your father is under so much stress because of you. We might lose our beautiful home because we had to use our own money to save Brandon. You forced us into this terrible position by refusing to help your own flesh and blood. You are cruel, Natalie. You have a steady job and perfect credit, but you left us to drown. If we lose this house, it will be your fault. You will carry that heavy guilt for the rest of your miserable life." I deleted the message, smiling at the absolute absurdity of her empty threats, feeling zero remorse. I deleted the message, smiling at the absolute absurdity of her empty threats, feeling zero remorse. It was time to push them completely out of their comfort zone. I picked up my phone and called Harrison. I told him to stop dealing with them through certified mail and customer service channels. I wanted the official notice of default hand delivered to their front door by a process server. I wanted my father to look a legal representative in the eye and take physical possession of his own financial ruin. Harrison arranged it immediately. The next afternoon, a process server walked up the long, manicured driveway of my parents' Connecticut estate. According to the report I received, my father opened the door wearing his expensive golf attire, expecting a simple package delivery. Instead, he was handed a thick manila envelope bearing the harsh legal seal of the state court system. The document clearly stated that Ironclad Holdings was initiating the final pre-foreclosure steps. He had a strictly limited window to cure the default, or the property would be seized and auctioned to the highest bidder. Most normal people would have panicked and immediately hired a bankruptcy attorney. Most people would have realized the game was entirely over. But my father was not a normal person. Richard was driven entirely by a fragile ego and an absolute terror of losing his elite social standing. Admitting financial defeat and moving out of that mansion was a fate worse than death to him. Instead of admitting his failure, he doubled down on his absolute arrogance. If he could not bully the bank, he would simply find a way to manipulate someone else into paying his massive debts. Jada kept me updated on their chaotic inner workings through encrypted messages. She told me that Richard, Patricia, and Brandon held an emergency meeting in their formal living room. They hatched a desperate and highly illegal scheme to save the house and keep Brandon out of federal prison. They decided to host a massive, lavish startup launch gala for Brandon Fake Technology Company. The plan was to invite every wealthy angel investor, local politician, and country club socialite they knew. Brandon would pitch his fraudulent software platform, making it sound like the next billion-dollar unicorn. They would secure hundreds of thousands of dollars in immediate seed money from these unsuspecting investors. Then Richard would quietly siphon off enough of that invested capital to pay down the arrears on the mansion and get Ironclad Holdings off his back. It was a spectacular display of hubris and criminality. To fund this luxurious gala, Richard and Patricia maxed out their very last lines of credit. They rented out an exclusive ballroom at a premier country club. They hired premium caterers, a string quartet, and expensive lighting technicians. They were spending money they did not have to project an illusion of extreme wealth, hoping to trap real wealth in their tangled web of lies. Jada sent me the entire guest list and the financial breakdowns of the upcoming event. She was disgusted by their behavior, but she played along at home, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. "They are going all out, Natalie," she wrote in her secure message. "Brandon is rehearsing a speech filled with fabricated revenue projections and imaginary corporate partnerships. Your father is calling every rich friend he has, promising them ground floor equity in a non-existent product. They truly believe this one night is going to save their entire empire." I read Jada's message and felt a deep sense of thrilling anticipation. This gala was not going to be their salvation. It was going to be their public execution. They were setting up a massive stage for their own downfall. I forwarded the guest list to Harrison and my legal team so we could prepare the final crushing blow. I wanted to make absolutely sure that when the truth came out, it would happen in front of the exact people my parents spent their entire lives trying to impress. The sheer arrogance of throwing a lavish party while actively defaulting on a mortgage was staggering, but it fit my father perfectly. He would rather commit massive fraud than ever admit he was broke. 2 days before the scheduled event, an email arrived in my personal inbox. It was an electronic invitation to the gala sent directly from my father. He could not resist the urge to gloat even when he was actively drowning in debt. He wanted to rub his imaginary victory in my face. The invitation was designed with sleek modern graphics boasting about Brandon and his revolutionary software launch. Below the formal details, my father had added a custom note specifically for me. It read, "Come see what real success looks like, Natalie. Brandon is raising millions without your pathetic help. We do not need your credit score, and we certainly do not need your negativity. You can stand in the back and watch your brother become a titan of industry." I read the email and let out a genuine hearty laugh. The absolute delusion was almost impressive to witness. He was inviting the secret owner of his mortgage to watch him commit corporate fraud. I clicked the reply button and typed a very brief response. "I would not miss it for the world, Richard. See you there." I closed my laptop and walked into my expansive walk-in closet. If I was going to attend a high society gala designed to humiliate me, I needed to look the part. I was not going to show up as the beaten-down daughter they kicked out on Easter. I was going to arrive as the wealthy corporate entity that held their entire future in the palm of my hand. It was time to get ready for the main event and end this toxic game forever. My family was about to learn a very hard lesson about hubris and consequence. I was ready. The evening of the startup launch gala arrived with a crisp autumn chill in the air. I pulled my newly purchased luxury sedan up to the valet stand of the Oak Ridge Country Club. This was the most exclusive and expensive venue in the entire county. My parents had clearly spared absolutely no expense to create this elaborate illusion. The valet opened my door, and I stepped out onto the pristine cobblestone driveway. I was not wearing the sensible clearance rack dresses my family was accustomed to seeing me in. Tonight, I wore a custom-tailored midnight blue suit that cost exactly $5,000. The fabric draped perfectly, projecting an aura of absolute power and unshakable confidence. I paired it with sleek leather heels and a minimalist diamond necklace I had purchased myself just yesterday. I walked through the grand double doors of the club, leaving the valet holding my keys with a stunned expression. The main ballroom was a spectacle of desperate financial theater. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden light over dozens of tables draped in heavy silk linens. Waiters in crisp white tuxedos circulated through the room, carrying silver trays loaded with expensive champagne and caviar appetizers. The room was already packed to maximum capacity. I recognized local politicians, prominent real estate developers, and wealthy socialites from my parents' country club circle. These were the exact people my father desperately wanted to impress. These were the very deep pockets Brandon planned to drain to cover up his massive corporate fraud. I stepped fully into the ballroom, taking in the sights and sounds of their impending doom. I walked over to a passing waiter and casually lifted a crystal flute of champagne from his silver tray. I took a slow sip, letting the dry bubbles wash over my tongue. I did not have to wait long for the main attraction to find me. Less than 3 minutes after I entered the ballroom, my parents spotted me from across the crowded floor. I watched as Richard tapped Patricia on the shoulder, pointing a thick finger in my direction. They whispered something to each other before navigating their way through the sea of wealthy guests. They marched toward me with their heads held high, moving with the aggressive confidence of people who thought they had already won the war. They cornered me near a massive ice sculpture, completely cutting off my path to the main seating area. Richard wore a rented tuxedo that looked slightly too tight around the collar. Patricia was draped in a sequined gown that I knew for a fact was purchased on a severely maxed-out credit card. They looked at me with expressions of pure, unfiltered disdain. "Well, look who decided to actually show up!" Richard sneered, his voice intentionally loud enough for the nearby investors to hear. "I am genuinely surprised you had the nerve to walk through those doors after the selfish stunt you pulled on Easter Sunday, Natalie. You have a lot of nerve showing your face here tonight." Patricia crossed her arms, looking me up and down with a highly critical eye. She let out a sharp, patronizing laugh. "And what exactly are you wearing?" she asked, dripping with condescension. "Did you seriously rent a designer suit just to pretend you fit in with this crowd? You must have drained your entire little savings account to play dress-up for one night. It is honestly pathetic, Natalie. You do not have to fake being successful around us. We know exactly what your bank account looks like. You are a medical data analyst who lives paycheck to paycheck. You should have just worn something from your own closet instead of embarrassing yourself by trying to look rich." I smiled, taking another calm sip of my champagne. The liquid felt cool and refreshing. I did not bother correcting her. I did not tell her that the suit was tailored specifically for my measurements, or that I could buy this entire country club with a single wire transfer. Letting them believe their own delusions was the best part of this entire evening. "You look very nice tonight, Mom," I said, keeping my tone perfectly pleasant and entirely unbothered. "It is a beautiful party. You must have spent a fortune putting all of this together. I am sure Brandon is very grateful for your generous financial support." Richard puffed out his chest, standing taller in his rented tuxedo. He clearly took my compliment as an admission of defeat. It takes money to make money, he boasted loudly, gesturing toward the stage where a massive projector screen displayed Brandon fake company logo. We know how to invest in real talent. Your brother is about to change the entire technology landscape tonight. We invited the top angel investors in the state, and they are practically begging to get in on the ground floor of his software platform. By the end of this gala, Brandon is going to secure millions of dollars in seed capital. We are going to be richer than we have ever been, and you will not see a single dime of it because you lacked the vision to support your own family. Patricia leaned in closer, her voice dripping with venom. Brandon is going to be a titan of industry, she hissed. He is going to be featured in financial magazines while you are still pushing papers at a miserable desk job. This was your one chance to be part of something massive, Natalie. All you had to do was sign that simple loan application. Now you get to stand in the back of the room and watch your younger brother become a multimillionaire. You are going to regret your jealousy for the rest of your miserable life. I just smiled and took another sip of my drink. I let their supreme arrogance peak, knowing the countdown to their absolute destruction had finally begun. I remained perfectly silent, letting them dig their own grave. The ambient music faded out as the main crystal chandeliers dimmed. A sudden burst of energetic instrumental music echoed through the massive speakers positioned around the ballroom. The crowd directed their attention toward the elevated stage at the front of the room. A bright spotlight illuminated the center of the platform, and my brother Brandon walked out from behind the velvet curtain. He wore a sharp black turtleneck and a tailored blazer projecting the exact image of a modern technology visionary. He held a sleek wireless microphone and flashed a brilliant, practiced smile that immediately captivated the wealthy audience. He commanded the room with an effortless charisma that had always blinded my parents to his actual failures. Welcome, everyone! Brandon began, his voice echoing smoothly across the Grand Country Club ballroom. Thank you all for joining us on this truly monumental evening. Tonight, we are not just launching a software platform, we are launching a complete revolution in digital architecture. He paced across the stage, projecting supreme confidence. Behind him, the massive digital screen illuminated with sleek, futuristic graphics and wildly fabricated revenue projections. For the past 2 years, my team and I have been working in absolute secrecy. Brandon lied effortlessly. We have developed a proprietary algorithm that bridges the gap between enterprise data management and seamless user integration. We recently completed our beta testing phase with several undisclosed Fortune 500 companies. The results were nothing short of spectacular. He paused, letting the magnitude of his absolute lies wash over the room. The investors in the crowd leaned forward, hanging on his every word. They saw a confident young executive holding the keys to the future. I saw a desperate fraudster trying to outrun a federal indictment. Because of these unprecedented initial metrics, I am incredibly proud to announce that our current pre-seed valuation has officially surpassed $5 million, Brandon declared. A wave of impressed murmurs rippled through the audience of local politicians and wealthy socialites. Brandon pressed a button on his presentation remote, and a massive graph appeared on the screen behind him. The chart showed an aggressive upward trajectory climbing into the tens of millions. It was a beautiful work of pure fiction. Every single data point on that screen was a complete fabrication designed to drain the wallets of the people standing in this very room. But I did not reach this $5 million milestone alone. Brandon continued, his voice taking on a tone of deep artificial humility. Every successful founder needs people who believe in their vision before the rest of the world catches on. I want to take a moment to specifically thank my primary angel investors. He gestured dramatically toward the front row. The spotlight swung around to illuminate Richard and Patricia. They stood together, beaming with overwhelming pride. My parents saw the future when no one else did, Brandon announced to the clapping crowd. They liquidated their own secure assets because they understood the explosive potential of my platform. They are not just my parents tonight. They are the brilliant venture capitalists who made this revolution possible. Richard puffed out his chest, looking around the room as the wealthy guests applauded his supposed financial genius. Patricia placed a hand over her heart, soaking in the admiration of her country club peers. They looked like the ultimate architects of a technology empire. They had absolutely no idea they were publicly taking credit for funding a federal crime. Brandon waited for the applause to die down before he continued. His eyes scanned the darkened room until they locked directly onto me standing near the ice sculpture. His confident smile twisted into a cruel and highly calculated smirk. He could not resist the opportunity to assert his dominance publicly. Of course, not everyone possesses that kind of rare entrepreneurial vision, Brandon said, his voice dripping with condescension. Some people are simply wired to play it safe. They prefer to stay in their small, comfortable boxes, pushing papers at boring desk jobs, while the real innovators change the world. He chuckled softly into the microphone. In fact, I have a sibling who falls exactly into that category. When I offered her the chance to get in on the ground floor of this $5 million enterprise, she completely panicked. She lacked the vision to succeed because she was too terrified to take a risk. She chose her mundane little cubicle over the chance to build a legacy. A wave of polite laughter rippled through the crowd. The wealthy socialites chuckled at the expense of the anonymous, boring sister. They sipped champagne and shook their heads in unified amusement at my supposed lack of ambition. The arrogance radiating from the stage was absolutely suffocating. Brandon stood under the bright spotlight, basking in his manufactured glory, while actively insulting the very person he had begged for a loan just a few months prior. My mother turned around to look at me from her spot in the front row. She offered a sickeningly sweet smile that masked her deep satisfaction. My father gave me a look of pure triumph. They thought this was the ultimate victory. They thought they had successfully humiliated me in front of the upper crust of our city. They truly believed Brandon was minutes away from securing enough real investment capital to save their heavily mortgaged mansion and validate their toxic parenting choices. I stood perfectly still, holding my crystal flute of champagne. I did not flinch. I did not frown. I did not break eye contact with my brother on the stage. I simply smiled, a cold and knowing smile. Let them enjoy the applause. Let them soak in the fake validation. Let the absolute peak of their delusion carry them as high as possible. The higher they climbed, the harder the impact would be when gravity took hold. Brandon wrapped up his speech and invited the potential investors to approach the presentation tables where they could sign funding agreements. Brandon stood at the edge of the stage holding the microphone. He flashed his $1 million smile at the sea of wealthy guests. We have placement agreements ready at the presentation tables located on both sides of the ballroom, he announced smoothly. For those ready to open your checkbooks and join this digital revolution, our team is waiting to secure your equity shares. I watched as several older men in expensive suits began to move toward the tables, reaching into their tailored jackets for their designer pens. The trap was laid out. Right at that moment, a striking figure emerged from the shadows near the catering entrance. Jada wore a stunning crimson business suit that commanded absolute attention. Her dark eyes were locked dead onto her husband. She walked with the fierce, unyielding purpose of a woman who had meticulously prepared for this exact second. Her heels clicked sharply against the hardwood floor, cutting through the soft murmur of the wealthy crowd. Brandon saw her approaching the stage, and his confident smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. He quickly recovered, extending his hand toward her as she climbed the short set of stairs to the platform. "Ladies and gentlemen," Brandon said, his voice dripping with fake affection, "please welcome my beautiful wife, Jada. She has been my rock through this entire development process." He stepped forward to hand her the microphone, expecting her to play the role of the supportive spouse. Jada took the microphone from his outstretched hand. She did not return his smile. She looked directly at the audience. "Thank you for that introduction, Brandon," she said. Her voice echoed through the ballroom, carrying a crisp, terrifyingly calm authority. "However, I am not here tonight to play the supportive wife. As of 48 hours ago, Brandon and I are legally separated." A heavy, uncomfortable silence instantly fell over the massive room. The investors reaching for their checkbooks suddenly stopped. Richard and Patricia froze in the front row, their faces turning pale. I watched from the back of the room, enjoying every single second of the spectacle. Jada turned her attention back to the crowd. For those who do not know me, my name is Jada, and I am a senior corporate auditor. My entire career is dedicated to examining complex corporate financial structures, uncovering hidden liabilities, and exposing corporate fraud. Over the past week, I conducted a comprehensive hostile audit of my husband and his supposedly revolutionary software platform. I am standing here tonight because it is my ethical obligation to show you exactly what you are about to invest your hard-earned money into today. Before Brandon could react, Jada pulled a small remote clicker from her crimson blazer. She pointed it at the media booth in the back of the room. The projection technician, whom Jada had paid off earlier, switched the input channel. The massive digital screen behind Brandon flickered. The fake graph showing the $5 million valuation vanished completely. In its place, a raw, unfiltered, highly detailed bank statement populated the screen. The numbers were highlighted in glaring red ink for everyone in the room to clearly read. "This is the actual operating account for the company you are about to fund," Jada announced, pointing at the screen. "As you can clearly see, there is no $5 million valuation. There are no corporate clients. What you are looking at is a shell company carrying exactly $1.2 million in hidden subprime debt." The crowd erupted in loud gasps. Several investors immediately stepped away from the presentation tables. Brandon stood completely frozen, his face shining with cold sweat under the bright stage lights, unable to move. Jada clicked the remote, bringing up a new spreadsheet. "The initial seed money provided by the angel investors in the front row," she said, gesturing toward my horrified parents, "was not used for software development. It was systematically siphoned into personal accounts to fund a fake lifestyle. You will see authorized payments for a leased luxury sports car, country club dues, and personal wardrobe expenses. The revenue projections were generated using fabricated invoices from dummy corporations created by Brandon to trick secondary lenders into providing him with cash." Brandon opened his mouth to speak, but his voice failed him. He was paralyzed by the overwhelming weight of his exposed crimes. Jada clicked the remote one final time. A scanned commercial credit application appeared on the massive screen. It was for a $250,000 business loan. When the subprime lenders threatened to call in his debts, Brandon panicked. Jada explained, her voice dropping to a furious octave. "He attempted to secure this massive federal loan by forging my personal signature as the primary financial guarantor on the document. He committed identity theft against his own wife," Jada stated, staring directly at my brother. "Furthermore, the audit trail proves that Brandon has been actively hiding these fraudulent cash transfers from the federal government. He is currently engaging in massive IRS tax evasion. I have already turned this complete forensic file over to the appropriate federal regulatory authorities. I highly advise anyone holding a pen to put it away immediately unless you want to be legally entangled in a federal wire fraud investigation." The finality of her words hung heavily in the quiet room. The ballroom descended into absolute chaos. The wealthy investors did not just put their pens away. They grabbed their coats and began walking rapidly toward the exit doors. They whispered angrily to one another, deeply disgusted that they were almost conned by a cheap fraudster. My father, Richard, jumped out of his front row seat, shouting at the fleeing guests to wait. My mother, Patricia, covered her face, sobbing loudly into her hands because she knew their financial ruin was entirely unavoidable. Brandon remained completely glued to the stage, paralyzed, staring blankly at the massive digital screen, displaying his undeniable guilt to the entire world. The panic mutated into an ugly scene as guests scrambled for the exits. My father, Richard, could no longer maintain his facade. Realizing his financial salvation was walking out sent him into a blind rage. He shoved past a retreating investor and stormed toward the stage. His face contorted into a mask of pure fury, and his skin turned a dangerous shade of crimson. He pointed a trembling finger directly at Jada, who stood unbothered next to my brother. You treacherous snake! Richard bellowed, his voice carrying over the commotion. How dare you sabotage my son? I will sue you for every penny you have. I will ruin your auditing career and ensure you never work in the financial sector again. Jada did not flinch. She looked down at him with disgust. You cannot sue someone for telling the truth, Richard, she replied calmly. And you certainly cannot afford my legal rate anyway. That pushed him over the edge. He scanned the room wildly, his furious eyes locked onto me standing calmly near the ice sculpture in my blue suit. He saw the cold satisfaction radiating from my posture, and the pieces clicked together in his mind. He realized that Jada and I had orchestrated this entire public execution together. You! Richard screamed, marching straight toward me. You put her up to this. You orchestrated this smear campaign because you are a jealous, bitter failure. You could not stand to see your brother succeed, so you gathered fake documents to embarrass us. He stopped a few feet away, breathing heavily, his fists clenched. The few guests who lingered near the doors paused to watch the spectacle unfold. My father threw his arms wide, performing for the remaining audience. I am a multimillionaire, Richard announced at the top of his lungs. Do you hear me, Natalie? I am a wealthy man. I have unlimited resources and I am going to use them to crush you. I will leverage my $2 million estate to hire the most ruthless legal team in this state. I am going to bury you and that traitorous wife of his so deep in court fees you will never see daylight again. You messed with the wrong man tonight. I stood still, letting his desperate threats echo off the high ceilings. I took one final sip of my champagne, placed the crystal flute onto a passing waiter tray, and smoothed the lapels of my jacket. It was time to end this miserable charade once and for all. I stepped forward, closing the distance between us. I did not raise my voice, but I spoke with a chilling authority that made him take a step backward. I raised my hand and made a subtle gesture toward the main entrance of the ballroom. Right on cue, the heavy oak doors swung open. Mr. Harrison, the director of private wealth management, walked into the room. He wore a pristine black suit and carried a thick leather portfolio. He moved with a terrifying professionalism straight toward me. He stopped at my side, unzipped the portfolio, and handed me a stack of heavy legal documents. The papers were bound together and stamped with the bright red seal of the state court system. I took the documents and walked past my father directly toward the stage. I climbed the short steps, brushing past my paralyzed brother, and gently took the microphone from Jada. I turned to face my father, who was staring up at me with a look of profound confusion. What estate, Richard? I asked, my voice amplifying through the speakers and filling the venue. Are you talking about the sprawling $2 million Connecticut mansion you have been living in? Because I hold the legal records for that property right here in my hand. I held up the red-sealed documents for him and the rest of the lingering crowd to see. Let us talk about this vast wealth you claim to possess. I continued, my tone devoid of mercy. You cannot leverage your estate to sue me, Richard, because you do not own that estate. You have not owned it for 3 years. You took out a toxic subprime mortgage to cover Brandon's previous failures. And a private financial institution called Ironclad Holdings bought your debt. They became your new bank. And you have not paid your monthly mortgage to them in 4 straight months. My father's face went completely blank. His mouth hung open, but no words came out. Patricia let out a sharp, terrified gasp from the front row. You stopped paying your mortgage because you thought you could outsmart a faceless corporate entity, I said, leaning closer to the stage edge. You thought you could use that housing money to fund this fraudulent startup and then beg the bank for forgiveness later. But Ironclad Holdings is not a faceless corporate entity, Richard. I paused, letting the absolute silence of the room amplify my next words. I am the sole managing director and the 100% owner of Ironclad Holdings, I revealed, watching the comprehension slowly dawn on his horrified face. I am the company you have been writing your checks to for 3 years. I am your bank. You are currently in catastrophic default on your loan, and I am officially foreclosing on your house at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. The physical reaction was immediate and devastating. Richard's legs simply gave out beneath him. He collapsed forward, dropping heavily to his knees on the hardwood floor. The arrogant patriarch who had threatened to bury me just moments ago was now kneeling in the wreckage of his own destroyed empire. Patricia fell out of her chair, landing on the floor beside him. She began to wail loudly, a pathetic, piercing sound of absolute despair and total ruin. Brandon stood behind me, completely broken, unable to even look at the parents he had dragged down with him. The game was over, and I had taken everything. The morning sun crested over the city skyline, casting a brilliant golden glow through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my luxury penthouse. I stood at the marble kitchen island, holding a warm mug of freshly brewed espresso. The chaotic events of the previous night had settled into a profound sense of quiet victory. At exactly 7:30, my secure corporate phone buzzed with an incoming call from Mr. Harrison. He informed me that the county sheriff had officially arrived at my parents' Connecticut estate. The foreclosure was no longer a threat. It was an active reality. The legal team had coordinated with local law enforcement to ensure the eviction proceeded smoothly and without any delays. My parents and my brother were currently being escorted out of the $2 million mansion they had falsely claimed as their own. They were standing on the damp morning lawn, surrounded by whatever hastily packed moving boxes they could carry. The massive wooden front doors were being padlocked, and a bright orange eviction notice was being taped directly to the pristine glass. Almost exactly at 8 o'clock, my personal cell phone began to ring. It did not stop. The screen illuminated continuously with a relentless barrage of incoming calls, text messages, and frantic voicemail alerts. The very people who had kicked me out into the freezing rain on Easter Sunday were now desperately trying to reach the daughter they had discarded. I did not answer a single call. I simply set the phone on the counter and watched the missed call counter climb higher and higher. Richard, Patricia, and Brandon were standing outside in the cold, finally experiencing the exact same terror and humiliation they had so casually inflicted upon me. When the ringing finally paused, I tapped the voicemail icon and played the messages on the external speaker. The crisp sound of my father sobbing filled the quiet kitchen. It was not a dignified cry. It was a pathetic, desperate wail of a man who had lost his entire fake kingdom. "Natalie, please pick up the phone," Richard pleaded, his voice cracking wildly. "The sheriff is here. They are locking the doors. We are standing on the grass with nothing. You have to stop this right now. Call your lawyers and tell them to call off the police. We are blood, Natalie. We are your family. You cannot put your own flesh and blood out on the street like this." I know I was harsh on Easter. I know I made mistakes. But a daughter does not do this to her father. I am begging you. Just give us another chance to make this right. The message ended with a heavy sob and the sound of the line disconnecting. I took a slow sip of my espresso, feeling absolutely nothing for him. He was not crying because he regretted abusing me. He was crying because he had finally encountered a consequence he could not bully his way out of. He invoked the concept of blood only when it benefited him financially. The next voicemail queued up. It was my mother, Patricia. Her voice lacked its usual arrogant edge. Instead, she sounded completely unhinged and deeply terrified. "Natalie, please answer me," she begged, her breath hitching in panic. "You are scaring us. The police will not let us go back inside to get the rest of our clothes. How could you keep this a secret from us? How could you hide Grandma Beatrice's money? She left that trust fund for the family. You have $14 million. You have more than enough to save us. Just pay off the mortgage balance. Just give us a fraction of the trust fund so we are not homeless. Remember all the good times we had in this house. Remember your childhood. I am your mother. You owe me some respect. Do not leave me out here in the cold. Please, Natalie, have some mercy. Send your lawyers to fix this." I shook my head at the sheer delusion of her words. She dared to demand respect while actively demanding my inheritance. She wanted me to remember the good times in a house where I had been treated like a second-class citizen for my entire life. She wanted me to dip into the very funds my grandmother had specifically hidden from her just to save her from the consequences of her own financial negligence. There was no apology for her cruelty. There was only a desperate demand for a bailout. Then my phone chimed with a long text message from Brandon. Even in the face of absolute ruin, my brother remained a textbook narcissist. He did not call because he was too much of a coward to hear my voice. Instead, he sent a rambling paragraph entirely shifting the blame. "Natalie, you have to help me," the text read. "Mom and Dad are losing it out here. This is all their fault. They were the ones who told me to stop paying the mortgage. They told me they could handle the bank. I did not know they were defaulting on the house. I am just trying to build my company. My investors are backing out because of what Jada did last night. If you do not wire me some of that trust fund money right now, I am going to be ruined. You are a millionaire now. You can afford to give me a loan. Do not be greedy." I read the text and let out a sharp laugh. Even now, standing on the lawn with his evicted parents, Brandon was still asking for a loan. He was still calling me greedy while begging for my money. They were fundamentally broken people incapable of genuine accountability. They were drowning in their own hubris, expecting me to throw them a life raft. I placed my empty espresso cup into the sink and picked up my car keys. I had listened to enough of their pathetic begging. I took the private elevator down to the secure parking garage. My sleek black luxury sedan sat gleaming under the fluorescent lights. I slid into the driver's seat, savoring the pristine interior. Navigating through the morning traffic toward the Connecticut suburbs, my mind was perfectly clear. I remembered the night they threw me out into the freezing rain. I remembered sitting in damp clothes in that diner wondering how I was going to survive. They wanted to break me and force me into financial servitude to my brother. But their cruelty had forged me into something unbreakable. The drive took 45 minutes. I rolled the windows down, letting the morning air fill the cabin. I felt a profound sense of closure. I was going there to draw a permanent line in the sand. I turned onto the familiar street leading to my parents' estate. I saw the flashing lights of two county sheriff cruisers parked across the brick driveway. I slowed my car to a crawl, approaching the wrought iron gates. The scene unfolding on the front lawn was a masterpiece of poetic justice. The sprawling $2 million mansion loomed in the background, but its former masters were reduced to sitting on the damp grass. Stacks of cardboard boxes and hastily packed garbage bags were piled around them. Richard was pacing furiously, yelling into his cell phone, trying to find anyone offering a bridge loan. Brandon was sitting on a taped-up box, staring blankly at the ground. Patricia was arguing with a uniformed deputy, pointing frantically at the padlocked front doors. I pulled my sedan up to the edge of the driveway, letting the engine idle smoothly. The crunch of tires on gravel caught Patricia's attention. She turned around, her eyes widening, recognizing me behind the wheel. She abandoned her argument with the deputy and sprinted across the lawn toward my car. She practically threw herself against the passenger side door, tapping frantically on the glass. I pressed a button, and the tinted window rolled down with a soft, mechanical hum. "Natalie," she gasped out of breath. Her makeup was running down her cheeks in dark streaks, and her perfectly styled hair was a disheveled mess. "Thank goodness you came. I knew you would not let this happen. You have to tell these officers to stop. They are treating us like common criminals. They locked us out." I rested my arm on the door panel, looking at her with absolute ice in my veins. "I am the one who told them to lock the doors, Patricia." I replied, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "Ironclad Holdings owns this property and you are trespassing." Patricia let out a loud sob, gripping the edge of the car window. "Please, Natalie," she begged. "You cannot do this. We are your parents. We raised you in this house. We gave you everything. You have $14 million. You can buy this house outright and let us stay. Just give us a second chance. I promise things will be different. We will respect you. Please do not leave us out here on the street. We have nowhere else to go." Richard had noticed my arrival and jogged over to the car, his face a mask of desperation. Brandon trailed slowly behind him, refusing to make eye contact with me. "Natalie." Richard pleaded, grabbing the window frame next to my mother. Listen to me. I was wrong. I was too harsh on Easter. I let my temper get the best of me. You have made your point. You won. You hold all the cards. Now please do the right thing and help your family. I will pay you back every cent. You have no money to pay me back, Richard, I stated flatly. You drained your retirement to fund federal wire fraud. You are completely bankrupt. Brandon finally looked up, his face twisted into a pathetic scowl. Come on, Natalie, he whined. You are loaded now. Do not be so stingy. Just pay off the house so we can all get back inside. I looked at the three of them standing in the driveway begging for the wealth my grandmother had hidden from them. The sheer entitlement was staggering. I want you all to listen to me very carefully, I said, my voice ringing with absolute finality. On Easter Sunday, you revoked my lease and threw me out into the pouring rain. You told me to pack my bags and get out of your sight. You told me I was a failure because I refused to sign my life away for a fraud. I leaned closer to the window, staring directly into my father's eyes. You told me I could not survive in the real world without you. Well, here we are. Let us see how you survive without me. Patricia wailed, burying her face in her hands. Richard's face contorted in absolute shock as the reality of my words crushed his remaining hope. I will not give you a single dime, I continued. You made your choices, and this is your consequence. I looked past them toward the senior deputy standing near the front porch. I gave him a firm nod, signaling that my business here was completely finished. The deputy nodded back, stepping forward to instruct them to step away from the vehicle and vacate the premises entirely. I reached down and pressed the button to roll up the passenger window. Patricia reached out, trying to stop the glass, but Richard pulled her back, realizing it was entirely over. The tinted glass slid up, sealing me inside the quiet cabin of my car. I shifted into drive and pulled away from the curb. I checked my rearview mirror one last time. I watched my father, my mother, and my brother standing on the wet grass, surrounded by their packed boxes and their shattered ego. I did not feel an ounce of pity. I merged onto the main road, leaving them behind in the street forever. The wheels of justice move slowly, but when they finally crush you, they grind you into absolute dust. That is exactly what happened to my brother Brandon over the next 6 months. Jada had not made empty threats at that gala. She had handed over a meticulously organized forensic file to the federal authorities. The IRS and the Federal Bureau of Investigation launched a joint task force to investigate his startup. Because he had left a blatant digital trail of fabricated invoices and siphoned investor capital, the investigation was remarkably short. Early one Tuesday morning, federal agents arrived at the cheap motel where Brandon had been staying since the eviction. They escorted him out in handcuffs while local news cameras captured every humiliating second. He was officially indicted on multiple counts of wire fraud, bank fraud, and severe tax evasion. His public defender tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the sheer scale of his financial crimes made leniency impossible. The judge presiding over his case was notoriously strict regarding white-collar crime. Brandon stood in the courtroom crying and blaming our parents for pressuring him to succeed. He claimed he only forged the documents because he was afraid of disappointing our father. It was a pathetic display that earned him no sympathy from the court or the jury. He was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison with no possibility of early parole. The golden child who had demanded $250,000 from me on Easter Sunday was now wearing a standard-issue orange jumpsuit. He spends his days making 30 cents an hour working in the hot prison laundry room, entirely stripped of his luxury sports cars and tailored suits. The fallout for Richard and Patricia was equally catastrophic and deeply satisfying to watch unfold from a safe distance. When the news of Brandon and his federal indictment broke, the final remnants of their high society facade evaporated completely. Their wealthy friends from the country club immediately blocked their numbers. Nobody wanted to be associated with the parents of a convicted fraudster, especially parents who were now completely destitute. Without my grandmother and her secret trust fund to bail them out, they were forced to file for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. The courts aggressively liquidated whatever meager assets they had left to pay off the angry investors from the gala. They went from hosting lavish dinner parties in a $2 million mansion to signing a lease for a cramped one-bedroom apartment in one of the worst neighborhoods on the edge of the city. The building smelled of damp mildew, and the heating barely worked during the cold winter months. But the most devastating blow to their massive egos was how they actually had to survive on a daily basis. Because they had drained their entire retirement accounts to fund a criminal enterprise, they had absolutely no safety net left. At 62 and 60 years old, my parents were forced to enter the minimum wage workforce just to afford groceries and basic utilities. Richard, the man who used to mock my medical data analyst career as a boring desk job, now works the closing shift at a local hardware store. He spends his evenings wearing a bright red vest, sweeping up dirty sawdust and restocking heavy bags of fertilizer. His back constantly aches, and he has to take orders from a manager who is half his age. Patricia, the woman who criticized my clothes and called me a failure, operates a cash register at a discount retail clothing chain. She spends her days standing on her feet, scanning barcodes for angry customers who treat her with the exact same dismissive arrogance she used to inflict on me. They live paycheck to paycheck, constantly exhausted, and completely ignored by the world they once thought they ruled. I heard through a former neighbor that they constantly argue in their tiny apartment, blaming each other for losing the mansion and raising a criminal son. Meanwhile, the people who chose the truth were thriving. Jada finalized her divorce from Brandon with surgical precision. Because she blew the whistle on his fraudulent activities and cooperated fully with federal investigators, she walked away from the marriage unscathed. She retained her auditing license and kept her pristine financial reputation intact. She did not have to pay a single dime toward his government restitution. Her firm was so impressed with her forensic work and ethical standards that they promoted her to a senior partnership role. She now commands a massive salary and oversees complex corporate investigations across the country. She recently purchased a beautiful modern townhouse and drives a new luxury SUV that she bought with her own money. She never has to answer to a toxic family again. We maintained a close and highly respectful friendship after the dust settled. We meet for lunch at least twice a month at an exclusive bistro located just a few blocks away from my penthouse. We sit on the patio drinking sparkling water and eating gourmet salads. We do not spend our time talking about the miserable people we left behind. We talk about our rising careers, our growing investment portfolios, and our exciting plans. We share a unique bond forged in the fires of a highly toxic family dynamic. We both saw the financial rot hiding behind their shiny country club smiles and their fake expensive suits. We both had the extraordinary courage to walk away from their manipulation and build our own independent empires from scratch. Jada is a brilliant, fiercely loyal, and exceptionally capable professional. She is exactly the kind of strong, independent woman I am incredibly proud to call my very best friend. Our success is the ultimate proof that leaving toxic people behind is the best financial and emotional decision anyone can ever make. We survived the storm, and now we absolutely own the entire horizon. I stand by the expansive glass window of my new corner office, letting the brilliant afternoon sunlight wash over my face. The view from the 30th floor of this downtown high-rise is absolutely breathtaking, but the true beauty lies in the absolute freedom I feel standing here. The heavy mahogany door behind me features a sleek frosted glass panel with a very specific name etched into the surface. It reads, "The Beatrice Financial Empowerment Foundation." When I finally secured the $14.5 million trust fund, left to me by my grandmother, I knew exactly what I needed to do with a portion of that massive wealth. I did not just want to buy luxury penthouses or expensive cars. I wanted to build a lasting legacy that would actively dismantle the exact kind of toxic financial manipulation my father and my mother had subjected me to for my entire life. I allocated $3 million to establish this nonprofit organization. We provide top-tier legal representation and comprehensive financial literacy programs to individuals who have been exploited by their own families. Every single day, women and men walk into this office carrying the heavy burden of ruined credit scores, forged signatures, and stolen savings accounts because a parent or a sibling used guilt and obligation to bleed them dry. They sit in the comfortable chairs across from my desk, looking just as terrified and hopeless as I did on that cold, rainy Easter night when my father kicked me out. We help them freeze their compromised assets. We hire aggressive litigation attorneys to prosecute the family members who stole their identities. We teach them how to rebuild their credit and establish ironclad financial boundaries that no toxic relative can ever breach again. Grandma Beatrice knew that financial control was the ultimate weapon abusers use to trap their victims. She gave me the sword to cut my own chains, and now I am handing that exact same sword to hundreds of other survivors I walk over to my large desk and take a seat in my leather executive chair. I pick up a framed photograph resting next to my computer monitor. It is an old picture of Grandma Beatrice smiling warmly at the camera. I trace the edge of the silver frame, feeling a profound sense of gratitude. She saw my strength long before I ever recognized it in myself. She knew that the quiet medical data analyst who always followed the rules had the capacity to become an absolute powerhouse, if she was just given the right tools. I spent 33 years of my life playing the role of the family scapegoat. I allowed Richard and Patricia to convince me that my stable career was just a boring desk job. I allowed them to prioritize Brandon and his flashy delusions while I quietly paid off his debts and absorbed their constant disrespect. They demanded my loyalty, but offered absolutely zero protection in return. When they demanded I sign my financial life away to save my brother from his own incompetence, they expected me to fold. They expected the obedient daughter to sacrifice her own future to maintain their fake country club image. But the moment I refused, they showed their true colors. They weaponized my housing. They tried to throw me into the street to teach me a lesson about compliance. They thought they were punishing me, but they were actually setting me completely free. By severing their ties, they unlocked a future they could never touch. They handed me the keys to my own absolute independence. Now I am the master of my own destiny. I dictate the terms of my life. I control my wealth, my peace, and my environment. I no longer harbor any anger toward the people who used to be my family. Anger requires emotional energy, and I refuse to spend another ounce of my energy on individuals who willingly chose their own destruction. They are living the exact life they earned through their greed and their endless manipulation. Brandon is locked away in a federal prison cell, facing the reality of his massive wire fraud, Richard. And Patricia are working minimum wage jobs, struggling to pay rent for a tiny apartment completely stripped of the lavish lifestyle they valued above their own daughter. They are a closed chapter in a book I will never read again. I have built a chosen family of people who respect me and value my authentic self. People like Jada, who proved that integrity and courage are far thicker and more meaningful than blood. We support each other. We celebrate our victories without jealousy or hidden agendas. That is what true family actually looks like. As I look out over the city skyline, I feel a deep and abiding sense of peace. I survived the storm they tried to drown me in. I took the heavy black metal card my grandmother left me, and I turned it into an impenetrable fortress. I am no longer the victim of their financial abuse. I am the architect of my own extraordinary success. I have proven that a steady, practical mind can defeat loud, arrogant delusion every single time. My life is a testament to the power of walking away from those who only seek to drag you down. I have learned that the highest form of self-respect is simply refusing to participate in a game designed to break you. My team is actively expanding our operations across 3 new states next month to reach even more people who desperately need our targeted legal resources. expert financial guidance, and personal support right now today. Never let anyone weaponize your loyalty against you, especially family. If they demand your signature to save their mistakes, give them your absence instead. If you have ever cut off a toxic family member and thrived, drop a comment below. Hit subscribe for more stories of setting boundaries and taking back your power. The story of Natalie serves as a powerful reminder that family loyalty should never be weaponized to facilitate abuse. Society often conditions us to believe that blood relations demand unconditional sacrifice, regardless of the personal cost. However, Natalie Journey dismantles this deeply flawed ideology by demonstrating that true family is built on mutual respect rather than toxic exploitation. Her parents, Richard and Patricia, constantly used financial leverage and emotional manipulation to maintain control over her life. They demanded complete compliance while actively shielding their fraudulent son Brandon from the consequences of his reckless behavior. When Natalie was pushed to the absolute edge and evicted, she discovered that her grandmother had left her the ultimate tool for liberation. But the true lesson here is not simply about acquiring sudden wealth. It is about the profound courage required to enforce ironclad boundaries when you have been conditioned to accept mistreatment. Natalie did not use her immense fortune to buy back her parents' affection or rescue them from their catastrophic mistakes. Instead, she chose to let them face the severe consequences of their own greed. She recognized that bailing them out would only perpetuate the endless cycle of abuse. By allowing her family to collapse under the weight of their own arrogance, Natalie reclaimed her identity and her future. She transformed her profound pain into a structured foundation designed to empower other survivors of financial exploitation. Her story teaches us that we are never obligated to set ourselves on fire just to keep toxic family members warm. True empowerment comes from recognizing your inherent worth and refusing to compromise it for anyone. You have the absolute right to protect your peace, your assets, and your future. Please subscribe to our channel for more inspiring content on personal growth and establishing healthy life boundaries.